The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the distant thunder of war. Smoke clung to the air, and ashes floated like dying fireflies. A young soldier stumbled through the ruins of a burned village, his rifle trembling in his hands. Then he froze. From the shadows came a broken voice, weak yet piercing. A woman's voice. "Kill me! Kill me fast!" His heart lurched. There, lying against a shattered wall, was a blood-soaked girl, her eyes half closed but burning with pain. She wasn't begging for help, she was begging for death. And as he raised his weapon, his breath caught in his throat. Her torn dress slipped, and on her skin was a strange mark glowing faintly under the moonlight. His finger stopped on the trigger. The battlefield was silent, but inside him a storm had just begun. Her body trembled against the cold stones, every breath a ragged cry. Blood darkened the torn edges of her dress, spreading slowly across the dirt like a shadow that refused to stop growing. Her lips moved, cracked and dry, but her words cut sharper than any blade. "Kill me! Kill me fast!" It wasn't the scream of someone afraid of death. It was the plea of someone who had suffered far too long. Her eyes, glassy with pain, stared up at the soldier not with hope, but with urgency, as if death itself would be a gift, a release. And in that moment, her desperation wrapped around him like a chain, forcing him to decide if he was her executioner or her savior. The young soldier's boots scraped against broken stone as he approached, rifle clutched tightly to his chest. His orders were clear: show no mercy, leave no survivors. Yet his hands trembled as he knelt beside her. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her plea still echoing in his ears. He lifted the weapon, steel shaking under the weight of duty. But then his eyes caught something. Just beneath the torn fabric of her dress, carved into her skin, was a mark unlike anything he had ever seen. It pulsed faintly, as though alive, glowing under the pale wash of moonlight. His breath stopped. His finger froze on the trigger. This was no ordinary wound, no ordinary woman, and in that instant, he realized killing her might unleash something far worse than letting her live. The rifle slipped slightly in his trembling hands as his breath fogged in the night air. Every instinct screamed at him to pull the trigger, to end her suffering and follow the brutal code of war he had been raised in. But that mark, its faint glow, its unnatural stillness, paralyzed him. His lips moved before he even realized, voice raw, barely a whisper. "What are you?" The words hung in the cold silence, heavier than gunfire, heavier than death itself. For a moment, the battlefield around him seemed to vanish. There was only the soldier, the dying woman, and the terrible secret etched into her flesh. And as her eyes fluttered open, a flicker of something, pain, warning, or perhaps destiny, glimmered within them. He had not always been a soldier. Once, he was just a farm boy, with calloused hands from working the soil and dreams no larger than a quiet life under open skies. But war had devoured all of that. The boy was stripped away, replaced by a uniform, a rifle, and endless orders that turned mercy into weakness. He had seen villages burn, mothers weeping over lifeless children, comrades laughing as they carried out their commands. Every night those images clawed at him in his sleep, leaving him drenched in sweat. The generals told him survival meant silence, feel nothing, kill without hesitation, trust no one. And so he buried his humanity deep inside, wearing obedience like armor. Yet, standing over this wounded woman, that armor cracked. For the first time in years he hesitated, and in war, hesitation was more dangerous than any bullet. The soldier's heart pounded like a drum against his chest, each beat louder than the silence around him. His training screamed inside his head, end it, finish it, follow the code. She was nothing but a liability, a weakness that could cost him his life if anyone found out he had spared her. Yet another voice, softer but unyielding, rose from the depths he had tried so hard to bury. "She's human. She's suffering. Don't let her die like this." His hands shook as if torn between two worlds, one forged in blood and orders, the other whispering of compassion he thought he had lost long ago. Duty demanded he pull the trigger. Humanity begged him to lower the gun, and for the first time, he didn't know which side of himself he feared more. His finger slipped away from the trigger, and with it, the weight of his orders seemed to fall. The woman's ragged breathing echoed in his ears, each gasp a reminder that she was still alive, still fighting, even in her broken state. He swallowed hard, torn between fear and something dangerously close to hope. With a sharp breath, he lowered the rifle. Instead of ending her, he pulled his cloak from his shoulders and wrapped it around her frail body. Every nerve screamed that this was madness. If his commanders discovered her, he would be branded a traitor, executed without question. Yet the thought of leaving her to die felt heavier than any punishment. So he lifted her carefully, cradling her against his chest, and stepped into the darkness, knowing that with every footfall, he was choosing humanity over survival, and sealing a fate he could never undo. As he carried her through the ruins, his chest burned with more than exhaustion. A question gnawed at him with every step. What if saving her destroys me? His life was already hanging by a thread in this war, and now he had chosen to protect someone marked with secrets he could not understand. The army would hunt him if they knew. His comrades would kill him without hesitation. Even the woman herself might turn out to be more dangerous than the bullets he feared. Yet when he glanced down at her pale face resting against his arm, something inside him refused to let go. He had seen enough death to last a lifetime. For once, he wanted to fight for life, even if it meant sacrificing his own. But the weight of that choice pressed on him like an invisible chain, whispering that mercy could be the very thing that destroyed him. He laid her down in the shadowed corner of a crumbling hut, the night pressing close around them. For hours she did not stir, her body limp beneath the tattered cloak he had wrapped her in. Then, in the silence, her lips began to move. Faint, broken words slipped out like fragments of a forgotten language, whispered between shallow breaths. Sometimes it was a plea, sometimes a warning, sometimes a name he did not know. Her voice was low, almost ghostly, carrying tones that made the hairs on his neck rise. It was as if she were speaking to someone unseen, trapped in a world between dreams and death. He leaned closer, straining to understand, but the words twisted and dissolved before reaching sense. Still, the sound clung to him, stirring unease in his chest. It was no ordinary sleep. Her whispers felt like secrets meant to stay hidden. The soldier lit a stub of a candle, its weak flame shivering in the damp air. Shadows stretched long across the broken walls, and as the light fell upon her, he saw it again, the mark. What he thought was only a scar now seemed alive. With every flicker of the flame, the symbol on her skin throbbed faintly, as though it had a heartbeat of its own. The glow was not bright, but steady enough to make his stomach twist. He leaned closer, unsure if it was a trick of the light or something far more sinister. The candle flame wavered, yet the mark pulsed in rhythm, beating like a hidden drum. For the first time, he felt as if the darkness in the room was watching him, breathing with her. A chill spread through his veins. This was no wound of war. This was something older, something waiting to awaken. By morning, word had already begun to spread. The soldier overheard the whispers as he walked through the battered village streets, carrying supplies back to the hut. Old women clutched their shawls tighter, their eyes darting to the shadows as they muttered warnings. Men leaned close around dying fires, their voices low, speaking of symbols said to be older than kingdoms, marks that condemned those who bore them to a fate worse than death. Some swore such curses turned a woman into a vessel for demons. Others claimed the mark was a seal of power, feared even by kings. Children, too young to understand, repeated the stories with frightened giggles, though their mothers hushed them quickly. Each whisper sank into the soldier's chest, heavy as iron. If the villagers discovered the girl he hid, they would not hesitate to burn her alive, and perhaps him along with her. He pushed open the door of the hut, the dim light of dawn slipping through the cracks in the roof. She was still lying there, wrapped in his cloak, her breathing shallow but steady. For a moment, he thought she might not wake again, that perhaps the night had already claimed her. He knelt beside her, brushing away a strand of hair clinging to her damp forehead. Then, her eyes snapped open. No haze of confusion, no slow return from sleep. They opened sharp and sudden, as if she had been waiting for him all along. Her gaze locked onto his, piercing straight through him, stripping away every defense he had built as a soldier. The mark on her skin pulsed once, faint but certain, as her lips parted without sound. He froze. His breath caught in his chest. She wasn't looking at him, she was looking into him. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The soldier shifted uneasily, his hand still resting on the rifle across his lap, though he could not bring himself to raise it against her. Finally, his voice broke the silence, low and cautious. "Who are you?" She turned her head slowly, her eyes unreadable, and for a heartbeat he thought she might answer. But instead, her lips tightened, and she whispered, "My name does not matter." Her words were sharp, defensive, as if every syllable was a wall built between them. He tried again, pressing gently, but she only shook her head, her gaze fixed on the flickering candlelight rather than his face. To him, the refusal felt heavier than a name ever could. It carried pain, mistrust, and secrets she had no intention of sharing. And yet, beneath that defiance, he sensed a trembling fear, of him, of the world, perhaps even of herself. He offered her water from his flask, holding it carefully to her lips, but she turned her face aside, suspicion clouding her eyes as though she expected poison instead of relief. When he tried to set bread in her hands, her fingers trembled before dropping it to the floor, as if his gift carried hidden chains. Even when he adjusted the cloak around her shoulders to keep her warm, she flinched, pulling away as though his touch burned. Each small act of mercy he gave was met not with gratitude, but with wary silence or sharp glances, her walls rising higher with every attempt he made to reach her. It stung more than a wound, but he understood. Whatever she had endured before he found her had taught her that kindness was never free, and trust was a weapon easily turned against its owner. Despite her silence and suspicion, he found himself watching her with a strange ache in his chest. Every time her eyes flickered with fear, every time her body recoiled from his hand, something inside him whispered that she was not dangerous, only broken. The mark on her skin told him she carried secrets, perhaps even curses, but the trembling in her voice and the hollow look in her eyes spoke of a woman who had suffered more than any soldier's bullet could deliver. He wanted, almost desperately, to believe she was innocent, that beneath the guarded walls she had built there was someone worth saving. It was a dangerous hope, one that could blind him, one that could cost him his life. But still, he clung to it, because without that belief he feared he would lose the last fragile piece of his own humanity. That night, as the wind moaned through the broken timbers of the hut, he thought she was finally asleep. Her breathing had steadied, her body curled beneath the cloak he had given her. But then it began. First a faint whimper, then a sharp gasp, and suddenly her whole body convulsed as if something unseen had gripped her. She cried out words in that strange, fractured tongue, her voice rising and falling in tones that made the soldier's skin crawl. The candle sputtered violently, its flame stretching high before shrinking to a trembling spark. The walls of the hut seemed to shudder with each cry, dust falling from the rafters as though the very air recoiled from her dreams. He reached out to wake her, but froze, terrified that touching her might drag him into whatever darkness held her captive. In that moment, he realized her nightmares were not just dreams. They were storms that bled into the waking world. Her cries rose higher, breaking into a scream that rattled the soldier's bones. He leaned closer, torn between fear and the urge to pull her from the nightmare. And then it happened, clear, sharp, and unmistakable. She screamed his name. His name. The sound froze him where he knelt, his breath caught in his throat. She had never asked it, never heard it spoken aloud. Yet her lips formed it perfectly, as if she had known it long before they met. The echo of it clung to the walls, heavier than the silence that followed. He stumbled back, heart pounding, questions flooding his mind. How could she know him? Why would his name live inside her dreams? For the first time, he wondered if he had found her, or if she had been waiting for him all along. At last, when the storm of her nightmares quieted, she lay staring into the darkness, her eyes no longer able to hide the weight she carried. Her voice came low, cracked, and hesitant, as though each word cut her from the inside. "You think soldiers did this to me?" she whispered, "but it was my own blood that gave the order." She turned her face away, shame and fury warring in her trembling breath. "I was not hunted by strangers. I was hunted by my family. My father, my uncles, my kin. The mark you saw. It is theirs, carved into me before I could even speak. A curse passed through generations, binding the first daughter of every line. Her words hung like smoke in the air, bitter and suffocating. The soldier felt a chill deeper than any battlefield could bring. She was not simply a victim of war. She was prey to her own blood. Her eyes glistened in the dim light as she pulled the cloak tighter around her shoulders, as though hiding the mark could make it vanish. "Every generation," she whispered, her voice trembling with both anger and sorrow. "The first daughter is chosen. Chosen not for honor, not for blessing, but for suffering. The mark is carved into her skin before she even learns her own name. They call it tradition, a bond with powers older than time. But it is no gift. It is a chain." Her breath hitched, and for a moment she looked more like a child confessing a secret than a woman hunted by fate. "I was born with no chance at freedom. From the moment I opened my eyes, my life was already promised to the curse my family worships and fears." The soldier felt his stomach tighten. She wasn't just running from war, she was running from a destiny her own blood had written on her flesh. Her voice hardened, carrying a bitterness that seemed to burn hotter than her wounds. "When the soldiers came," she said, her hands curling into fists, "my family did not hide me. They did not fight for me. They pushed me forward, like an offering to wolves. They told the soldiers I was cursed, that taking me would protect the rest of them. My own father, the man who should have shielded me, placed his hand on my shoulder and gave me away." Her breath trembled, rage and sorrow bleeding into every word. "I was not a daughter to them. I was a sacrifice, a shield for their cowardice." She lifted her eyes to the soldier then, and in them burned a pain deeper than any battlefield wound. "Blood betrayed me long before the enemy ever touched me." The soldier sat in silence, her words echoing inside him long after they left her lips. He had thought she was only another casualty of war, a broken soul caught in the crossfire. But now, staring at the faint glow of the mark beneath her skin, he understood the truth. This was no ordinary woman, and her curse was no simple superstition. By sparing her life, by carrying her when others would have left her to die, he had stepped into a story far older and darker than the war itself. He felt it in his bones. Her fate was bound to forces that stretched beyond blood, beyond family, even beyond nations. And somehow, in choosing mercy, he had tied himself to that same fate. He was no longer just a soldier. He was the keeper of a secret that could change everything, or destroy them both. The air inside the hut grew still, the candle's flame shrinking low as if it sensed what was coming. The soldier leaned forward, ready to ask her more, when a sound cut through the silence. Boots on gravel, slow, heavy, too many to count. His blood ran cold. Through the cracks in the wall, shadows shifted, figures moving with the discipline of hunters closing in on prey. The woman's body stiffened, her hand clutching his sleeve as if she already knew, her eyes, wide with terror, locked on his. Then came the scrape of steel, the murmur of voices, soldiers, not his own, men with orders to find her at any cost. The soldier's pulse thundered in his ears. They were no longer whispers in the dark. The pursuers had found them. He gathered her into his arms before fear could paralyze him, her frail weight pressing against his chest. The night swallowed them whole as he slipped from the hut and vanished into the tree line. Branches clawed at his uniform, roots threatened to trip him, but he pressed forward, every step driven by a desperation he could not name. Behind him, the glow of torches cut through the darkness, voices shouting, hunting. He wove through the forest, the canopy above blotting out the moon, then out into villages long abandoned, where broken doors swung in the wind and empty windows stared like hollow eyes. Each ruin whispered of lives torn apart by war, reminding him that if he faltered, she would become just another forgotten ghost. His lungs burned, his muscles ached, but he refused to stop. For every shadow they left behind, he knew more were waiting ahead. Days blurred together as they fled from one ruin to the next, always moving before dawn betrayed their hiding place. The soldier tended her wounds, shared what little food he scavenged, and kept watch through sleepless nights. At first, it was duty, an oath he had silently sworn the moment he chose not to kill her. But somewhere between the whispered breaths of her sleep and the rare flickers of trust in her eyes, duty began to feel like something more. A warmth he had not felt in years stirred within him, fragile and dangerous. He fought it, reminding himself she was a burden, a curse, a secret that could end him. She fought it too, keeping her words short, her walls high. Yet every moment their eyes lingered too long, every time her hand brushed his when he offered water, the silence between them grew heavy with something neither dared to name. They thought they were alone, hidden in the shell of an abandoned mill, when the creak of a door made the soldier whirl with his rifle raised. Relief washed through him for a heartbeat. It was a face he knew, a comrade he had marched beside, bled beside. But the relief soured as quickly as it came. The man's eyes slid to the girl, then back to him, narrowing with recognition and something colder. "So it's true," the comrade muttered, his hand resting on his weapon. "You've been hiding her." The soldier felt the weight of betrayal pierce deeper than any blade. This was a man he had trusted with his life, yet now greed and fear gleamed in his gaze. He wasn't here to help. He was here to trade secrets, to sell them both for his own survival. In that moment, the soldier realized the war outside was nothing compared to the war now standing in front of him. The struggle was brief, too brief. His comrade's whistle cut through the air, and within moments the hut was surrounded. Armed men poured in like shadows with steel, pinning him to the ground before he could raise his rifle. Rough hands bound his wrists, the cold bite of rope cutting into his skin. He fought, teeth clenched, but they tore her from his arms and dragged her across the floor. For an instant their eyes met, hers wide, unblinking, carrying a truth that froze him more than the ropes ever could. Leaning close as they pulled her away, her lips brushed his ear with a whisper meant only for him. "They will not kill me. They will kill you." The words settled like ice in his veins, heavier than chains. As they yanked him into the night, he realized she was not pleading for her life. She was warning him of his death. They dragged him to the center of a ruined courtyard, moonlight spilling over broken stones like a pale spotlight. The girl knelt a few paces away, her wrists bound, her head bowed, but her mark burning faintly against her skin. Around them, the pursuers formed a circle, their torches painting the night with fire. One stepped forward, a captain with a scar across his jaw, his voice hard as iron. "You know what she is," he barked. "You know what that mark means. Hand her over, and we will forget your crime. Protect her, and you share her curse." The soldier's knees dug into the dirt as he stared at her, heart pounding. He could feel every eye on him, every blade ready to strike. The demand was simple, but the choice was a noose tightening around his throat. Betray her to save himself, or stand against them all and burn with her. The soldier's breath came heavy, clouds of frost rising in the cold night air as the circle of torches closed tighter around him. His whole life had been built on obedience. Follow the chain of command, silence every question, survive by killing before you are killed. Now those same rules stood before him like iron bars, demanding he betray the one person he could not bring himself to abandon. His comrades' eyes burned with expectation, their weapons glinting, ready to cut him down if he resisted. Yet when he looked at the woman, bound and trembling yet unbroken, something inside him revolted. Obeying meant losing the last shred of humanity he had managed to salvage. Fighting meant certain death. Both paths were ruin. His fingers curled into fists as the truth struck him. This was not a battle he could win with steel. It was a battle that would demand his very soul. The cries of war still echoed in his memory, villages burning, children silenced, comrades falling one by one. He had been taught that courage was pulling the trigger without hesitation, that morality was nothing more than obedience wrapped in the flag of survival. But here, with the firelight painting his face and the woman's mark glowing faintly like a heartbeat against the dark, he understood how wrong they had been. True courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to stand despite it. True morality was not blind loyalty to orders, but the choice to protect the defenseless, even when the world demanded their blood. As the circle of blades closed in, the weight of every lesson he had ever been taught pressed against him. And yet, in the center of that suffocating fear, something rose inside him. An iron resolve, fragile but unbreakable. For the first time, he knew what it meant to fight for something greater than survival. As the pursuers closed in, their torches casting long and cruel shadows, the girl lifted her head. Her eyes, wide with fear, darted to the soldier, and in that instant, the mark along her skin began to stir. What had once been a faint shimmer now blazed with sudden life, glowing like molten fire beneath her flesh. The symbol pulsed, each throb in perfect rhythm with her racing heartbeat, until the light spilled from her skin and washed over the courtyard in waves. The soldiers staggered back, their blades shaking in their hands, faces lit by an otherworldly glow that seemed to strip away their courage. The soldier himself felt the heat of it, a force that was both beautiful and terrifying, like standing at the edge of a storm that could tear the world apart. In that moment he understood. The mark was no curse of weakness, it was power, and power always came with a price. Steel clashed and torches fell, the night alive with chaos. The soldier fought like a cornered wolf, but he was only one man against many. A blade slipped past his guard, tearing across his side, and warmth spilled down his uniform as his knees buckled. He hit the ground hard, the dirt soaking with his blood, vision blurring at the edges. Through the haze, he saw her break free from the men who feared to touch her glowing mark. She stumbled to his side, her hands trembling as they pressed against his wound. But instead of pleading or weeping, her lips began to move with a steady rhythm. Strange words, low, sharp, and ancient, slipped from her mouth, each syllable vibrating in the air like a forbidden chant. The torches flickered violently, the ground shuddered beneath them, and every man present felt the weight of something unseen pressing down. The soldier's fading heart pounded once more, not from fear, but from the terrifying knowledge that she was calling on a power no mortal was meant to hear. The night that followed was quieter, but it was heavy with pain. The soldier lay on a bed of straw inside the ruins of an abandoned chapel, his side wrapped in torn cloth already dark with blood. Every movement sent fire through his body, yet he said nothing, gritting his teeth as he tried to mask his weakness. She stayed beside him, her hands steady where his were not, changing his bandages with a gentleness that felt almost foreign after so much violence. In the silence, there were no questions, no mistrust, only the soft sound of her breath as she worked, and the occasional brush of her fingers against his skin. Hours passed in that fragile stillness, their eyes meeting only briefly, but each glance carried more than words could. In those small, stolen moments, her hand lingering a little too long, his gaze softening despite the pain, they began to share something that neither battle nor blood could name. It was not spoken, yet it grew as quietly and steadily as dawn breaking over a scarred land. For days, she had remained only a shadow beside him, caring for his wounds, guiding him through the silence, yet guarding her identity like a fortress no one could breach. But one evening, as the firelight flickered softly across the chapel walls, she sat close enough that he could feel the warmth of her breath. His eyes met hers, searching, not demanding, only waiting. Her lips parted, hesitant at first, as though the very act of speaking might summon danger. Finally, she whispered, her voice fragile but steady. "My name is Elira." The sound of it lingered in the still air, delicate yet powerful, carrying the weight of secrets and survival. For a moment he simply repeated it under his breath, as if to etch it into his soul. And though she quickly lowered her gaze, a faint tremor passed across her features. Relief, fear, and something softer, something she had long denied herself, trust. In the quiet moments between running and hiding, when the night was calm and the stars hung low like lanterns above the ruins, their voices softened. He spoke of places beyond the battlefront, fields untouched by fire, rivers that still sang, mountains that stood untouched by blood. She listened with eyes half closed, as if daring to imagine a life that was not borrowed from shadows. For the first time, she allowed herself to speak of freedom too, of mornings without fear, of walking in sunlight without chains, of laughter that did not have to be hushed. Each word was fragile, a thread spun from hope, yet together they wove a vision brighter than the world around them. They knew it was dangerous, foolish even, to dream while death still hunted them. But in those hushed hours, pressed close to dying embers, they allowed themselves to believe that beyond war and curses, there might still be a life worth running toward. Their whispered dreams of freedom did not last long. One night, as the soldier tended the fading fire, he noticed the mark along her shoulder shift beneath her skin, like living ink. What once glowed faintly with a strange light now deepened into a shadowy stain, its edges creeping outward like roots clawing through her flesh. She gasped in her sleep, her body twisting, sweat rolling down her face, as the darkness spread from her shoulder to her collarbone, then further still. He reached out, desperate to steady her, but the heat radiating from the mark burned against his hand. When her eyes snapped open, they carried both fear and resignation. She did not need to speak. The truth was plain. The curse was tightening its grip, each day claiming more of her body, pulling her further from the woman he had come to know. And as he stared at the crawling darkness, a single thought tore through him. Time was running out. The night was still when it happened. One moment she was speaking, her voice faint but steady, and the next her body shuddered violently as if struck by an unseen hand. Her knees buckled, sending her crashing to the cold stone floor, the mark across her skin flaring with a sickly glow. The soldier dropped beside her, catching her trembling frame, his hands pressing desperately against her shoulders. Her breath came in sharp gasps, each one thinner than the last, her eyes wide with panic yet already dimming. With what little strength remained, her fingers clutched at his arm, nails digging into his skin, as though to anchor herself to life. Then the words spilled from her cracked lips, fragile but heavy with finality. "I cannot survive the next moon." The sound of it tore through him like a blade. She wasn't begging, she wasn't warning, she was declaring a truth that left him staring into the face of a death he could not fight. Desperation drove him farther than fear ever had. With her frail body clinging to life in his arms, the soldier sought anyone who might hold an answer. He carried her through ruined villages where healers once tended the sick, only to find their halls empty, their herbs reduced to ash. He went to wandering priests, men who whispered prayers over her mark, their voices trembling before they admitted the curse was older than their faith. In his madness, he even approached enemies on blood-stained fields, lowering his weapon long enough to beg for knowledge. Some spat at him, others laughed, but none could offer salvation. With every door closed, with every prayer unanswered, the weight of truth pressed harder on his chest. He could fight soldiers, he could survive war, but he could not battle time, and time was tearing her away from him, one fading breath at a time. Every path he followed ended in the same dark truth. No healer's hand, no holy scripture, no whispered ritual could undo the mark. Wherever he turned, the answer was always spoken with the same heavy finality. There is no cure. The curse was not meant to be healed, only carried, until it consumed its vessel, or until the vessel was destroyed. The words struck him like chains tightening around his throat. "Kill her," they said. "Kill her quickly, before the mark spreads further, before it awakens fully and devours more than her life alone." Each time he heard it, he felt his chest hollow, his grip on her hand growing tighter as though defying the command. To them, she was a danger, a burden that must be cut away. But to him, she was no longer just the cursed woman he had stumbled upon. She was a Lyra, and the thought of ending her life with his own hands was a sentence more unbearable than any death the curse could bring. Her voice broke through the heavy silence, raw and trembling. "Kill me fast." She pressed herself to the cold ground, shivering as if the very air were trying to drain her strength. The mark on her skin pulsed faintly, glowing like it knew her fear, and shadows danced across the walls with each flicker of the candle. Her eyes, wide with terror and exhaustion, locked onto the soldier, silently pleading for release from a pain that words could not contain. Every second dragged like a lifetime, and he could feel the weight of her desperation pressing against his conscience, forcing him to confront a choice that could define both their fates. His heart refused to obey the cold logic of duty. Every instinct that told him to strike down the desperate figure before him faltered under the weight of her fear and pain. He could see the life trembling in her eyes, the way her body hunched as if carrying the world's suffering, and something inside him, a spark of humanity long buried under war, orders, and survival, stirred to life. He swallowed hard, his hands trembling, knowing that by choosing mercy, he risked everything, his rank, his comrades, even his own life. Yet, no matter the danger, he could not bring himself to end her, because to do so would also kill a part of himself he had fought so long to keep alive. He leaned closer, drawn by an impulse he didn't fully understand, and pressed a gentle kiss to her trembling hand. The moment his lips met her skin, a sudden shock ran through him, sharp and electric. His eyes widened as he felt the warmth of the mark crawling, slipping from her hand onto his own, etching itself into his flesh as if claiming him. The candlelight flickered wildly, shadows dancing across the walls, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. He staggered back, staring at his hand in horror and disbelief, whispering her name, unsure whether this bond was salvation or doom. He stared at her, seeing fear and hope intertwined in her eyes, and felt the weight of the curse pressing down on him. Every instinct screamed to run, to escape the darkness creeping into his own veins. Yet he knew what had to be done. With a steady breath, he placed his hands over hers, letting the mark fully transfer, feeling its fire burn through him as if it were his own life being rewritten. Pain coursed through his body, but he welcomed it, for her survival mattered more than his own. In that moment, he embraced the unbearable truth. He would bear the curse, endure the suffering, and face whatever horrors it brought, so she could live free. His lips trembled as he whispered, "Go, live your life. I will carry this for you." As the curse left her, a searing heat surged through him, the mark etching itself into his skin like molten fire. Every nerve screamed in pain, every breath felt stolen, yet he did not flinch. The glow that once haunted her body now pulsed faintly on his, a constant reminder of the sacrifice he had made. She gasped, her relief mingled with awe, while he staggered, feeling the weight of centuries of power and doom pressing down. In that instant, he understood the full cost of love and duty. The mark had left her, but it had chosen him, binding his fate to hers forever. With every ounce of strength left in his battered body, he lifted his gaze to meet hers, eyes shimmering with pain and something tender that had grown through their trials. His lips trembled as he whispered, words heavy with truth and sacrifice. "You were never meant to die, only meant to be loved." The words hung in the air, fragile yet unbreakable, carrying the weight of every danger faced, every betrayal endured, every moment of fear turned into courage. She reached for him, tears streaking her face, understanding at last the depth of his heart. In that quiet, trembling moment, the world seemed to pause, holding its breath as love triumphed over doom. She opened her eyes to the pale light of dawn, the silence around her heavy and still. The world seemed unchanged, yet everything had shifted. He was gone, and the weight of what had happened pressed on her chest. Tears ran freely as she traced the place where he had fallen, the memory of his sacrifice burning deep into her soul. Guilt and gratitude mingled within her, a storm of emotions she could not untangle. Every heartbeat reminded her of the man who had given everything so she might live. Softly, almost as if carried by the wind itself, she whispered his name, a prayer, a promise, and a reminder that love and courage endure even when the body fails. In the quiet, she felt him linger, his courage, his warmth, his choice, and knew that though he was gone, a part of him would live forever in her. In the stillness after the storm, she understood the truth that had been written in their lives long before they met. True love is not measured in words or fleeting moments, but in sacrifice. Sometimes, to save someone you care for, you must give up everything, your safety, your comfort, even your own life. It is in those choices, when the heart defies fear and the soul chooses courage, that love becomes immortal. The soldier had shown her that love was not just a feeling, it was an action, a burden willingly borne, a fire that could outlast darkness and death. She carried that lesson now, heavy yet radiant, a reminder that the greatest acts of love often leave scars, but also leave the world brighter than it was before.